The day my daughter Olivia called me a financial burden during her fancy dinner party, the elegant dining room went painfully quiet. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I simply nodded, took a small sip of my water, and asked her husband Mark to pass the bread basket. No one at that table, especially not my success-obsessed daughter, knew that the failed business owner sitting before them had quietly amassed over $5 million in strategic investments over the past 2 decades. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. "I'm sorry, everyone, but we need to be realistic," Olivia had said, wine glass poised in her manicured hand. "Since Dad's restaurant chain collapsed, he's become a financial liability. We're trying to figure out the most affordable assisted living options." She spoke about me as if I weren't sitting right there, as if my presence were merely a problem requiring a solution rather than a person worthy of dignity. I'd raised Olivia alone after her mother Elena died, when our daughter was just 14. For 23 years, I poured everything into giving her opportunities, working 60-hour weeks at my restaurants, living frugally in our modest home, driving the same reliable sedan for 15 years. What Olivia never knew was that while I built my visible business, I was quietly building an invisible empire through careful investments in emerging technologies, sustainable energy, and yes, even cryptocurrency before most people knew what blockchain meant. The path that led to that humiliating dinner party began 30 years earlier in Chicago, where I, Raymond Chen, opened my first small noodle shop after immigrating from Taiwan. I'd arrived with $900 in my pocket, an exceptional recipe for beef, noodle soup that had been in my family for generations, and an unwavering determination to create something lasting in America. The early years were brutally difficult, working 18-hour days, sleeping on a cot in the restaurant's back office, and learning English through conversations with customers and suppliers. Elena, a graduate student who frequented the restaurant, became first my English tutor, then my friend, eventually my wife, and finally my business partner as we expanded from one humble noodle shop to a small regional chain of 7 successful Asian fusion restaurants across Illinois and Wisconsin. We called our restaurant chain Golden Bridge, symbolizing our journey from east to west and the connection between traditional recipes and modern American tastes. Our shared dream expanded along with our business, culminating in the birth of our daughter, Olivia. From the moment she arrived, Elena and I dedicated ourselves to creating a future where Olivia would have every advantage we hadn't. We saved for her education, introduced her to art and music, and taught her the value of hard work through age-appropriate responsibilities in our restaurants. Customers often commented on the little girl carefully folding napkins or greeting guests at the door with practiced politeness. When Elena was diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer, our world shattered. The 18 months that followed were a blur of hospital visits, experimental treatments, and desperate hope, all while keeping our restaurants running and trying to maintain normalcy for Olivia. I still remember Elena's final coherent conversation, her voice weak, but her mind still sharp. "Promise me 2 things, Raymond," she had whispered, holding my hand with surprising strength. "Promise you'll make sure Olivia goes to college, a good one, and promise you'll take care of yourself too. Don't just exist for her. Build something for your later years." I kept both promises, though not exactly as Elena might have imagined. After her funeral, I threw myself into 2 parallel paths, building our restaurant business for Olivia's future and secretly beginning a careful investment strategy for my own. A financial advisor named Michael Robertson became my guide in this second endeavor, helping me navigate investment opportunities that balanced risk with potential growth. Most restaurant owners pour everything back into their businesses, Michael observed during one of our early meetings. They end up asset-rich but cash-poor. I won't make that mistake, I told him, thinking of Elena's words. The restaurants are visible. They're for Olivia's education and opportunities. But I need something invisible too, something just for later. Following this philosophy, I lived simply despite our business success. Our home remained the same modest 3-bedroom in a middle-class neighborhood. I continued driving practical, reliable vehicles rather than status symbols. When business associates or fellow restaurant owners questioned these choices, I would smile and say, "I'm investing in what matters most," letting them assume I meant only Olivia's future. And Olivia flourished. She excelled academically, participated in numerous extracurricular activities, and developed the polished confidence that comes from knowing your path is secure. By her high school graduation, she had transformed from the shy, grief-stricken teenager who had lost her mother into a poised young woman with ambitious plans and the means to achieve them. When she was accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I gladly covered the substantial remaining costs without a moment's hesitation. Throughout her college years, I continued expanding Golden Bridge, opening 3 more locations and increasing our catering operations. To the outside world, and to Olivia, it appeared that all my resources were channeled into our growing restaurant enterprise. Meanwhile, my invisible empire was quietly thriving. Michael's guidance proved invaluable as I diversified my portfolio, making careful early investments in companies like Amazon, Apple, and Tesla long before they became household names. I allocated portions of my earnings to municipal bonds, dividend-yielding stocks, and eventually, rental properties managed through a separate LLC that Olivia knew nothing about. "You understand compounding better than most business owners I work with," Michael commented during one of our quarterly reviews. "Most people want to see immediate returns or status symbols." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I've always played the long game," I replied. Patience was the first English word I truly understood. When Olivia graduated with her business degree and accepted a position at a prestigious marketing firm in Chicago, I couldn't have been prouder. She had fulfilled the first part of my promise to Elena, securing an education that opened doors to opportunities neither Elena nor I had ever had. What I hadn't anticipated was how quickly Olivia would embrace a lifestyle that valued external appearances over financial security. Within 2 years of her career beginning, Olivia was living in a luxury apartment in downtown Chicago, wearing designer clothes, and dating Mark Whitford, an investment banker from a wealthy Connecticut family. When they became engaged after a whirlwind romance, I was happy for her, but concerned about the values I observed in both her fiancé and his family. The Whitfords made little effort to hide their assessment of me as somewhat quaint and provincial, a hard-working immigrant whose modest success had given his daughter access to their rarefied world. During our first meeting at an exclusive Chicago restaurant, Mark's father, Richard, had asked pointed questions about my exit strategy. "Every successful business owner needs to know when to cash out," he advised, sipping his 18-year-old scotch, particularly in the restaurant industry, where margins are tight and trends change rapidly. "I'm not looking to exit," I replied calmly. "Golden Bridge is more than just a business to me." Richard exchanged a knowing glance with his wife. Victoria, the kind of look that said they'd expected exactly this level of unsophistication. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. If this story resonates with you, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything to us, and we have another powerful story coming tomorrow that you won't want to miss. The wedding was an elaborate affair at a historic Chicago hotel, with costs that made me wince internally, despite Olivia's assurances that we were splitting everything fairly with the Whitfords. I later discovered that their definition of fair meant I covered nearly 70% of the expenses, despite their family's considerably greater resources. Rather than create conflict, I paid the bills quietly, drawing from my restaurant profits while leaving my investment portfolio untouched. Following their honeymoon in the Maldives, Olivia and Mark purchased a sprawling home in North Shore, one of Chicago's most affluent suburbs. During my first visit, I noticed that every piece of furniture, every appliance, every fixture seemed selected to impress rather than for practical value or personal meaning. Don't you think this is a lot of house for just the two of you? I asked gently as Olivia showed me their third guest bedroom. We're planning for the future, Dad, she replied with a slight edge to her voice. Mark's on track for senior management, and we need a home that reflects his professional stature. Of course, I said, not wanting to dampen her excitement. It's beautiful. What followed were 5 years of watching my daughter and son-in-law build a life centered on acquisition and appearances. They hosted elaborate dinner parties for Mark's colleagues and clients, joined exclusive clubs, and took lavish vacations documented meticulously on social media. Olivia transitioned from her marketing career to what she called strategic consulting, which seemed to primarily involve connecting Mark to potential clients through carefully orchestrated social events. I continued to expand Golden Bridge, opening our 12th location and beginning preliminary discussions about franchising opportunities. Publicly, the business appeared to be thriving, and it was, though with the increasing complexity came new challenges. Food costs were rising, staffing became more difficult, and changing consumer preferences required constant menu innovation. Then came the pandemic. The restaurant industry was among the hardest hit, and despite my best efforts, pivoting to takeout, reducing staff while trying to support those we had to lay off, applying for every available governmental assistance program, Golden Bridge began to falter. By the time restrictions lifted, 3 of our locations had closed permanently, and the remaining 9 were operating at reduced capacity with significantly higher costs. I poured my own capital from the restaurant's reserves into keeping the business afloat, determined to preserve what Alina and I had built together and to protect the livelihoods of staff who had been with us for decades. Throughout this crisis, I kept my investment portfolio completely separate, adhering to the division I had established years earlier. The restaurants were for Olivia and our legacy. The investments were for my future security. In a cruel twist of fate, just as the restaurant business was beginning its slow recovery, disaster struck again. A lengthy investigation revealed that our head of operations, a trusted employee of 15 years, had been embezzling funds, falsifying vendor invoices, and misappropriating restaurant resources. The financial damage was substantial, but the reputational harm was catastrophic. Local news covered the story extensively, with headlines questioning how I could have been unaware of the fraud happening right under my nose. Suppliers began demanding payment up front. Banks became reluctant to extend credit, and customers, uncertain about the stability of the business, began dining elsewhere. Within 6 months, Golden Bridge Restaurants filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. 3 months after that, facing no viable path forward, we converted to Chapter 7, and 45 days later, I watched as the assets of the business Elena and I had built from nothing were auctioned to satisfy creditors. Throughout this painful process, I maintained a dignified public face, taking full responsibility for the failure, ensuring that employees received all possible support in finding new positions, and personally thanking loyal customers who had supported us for decades. Privately, I was grateful for the foresight that had led me to keep my investments entirely separate from the restaurant business, creating a financial firewall that remained intact despite the business collapse. Olivia's reaction to Golden Bridge's failure revealed aspects of her character I had either never seen or had chosen to ignore. Initially, she expressed appropriate sympathy, assuring me that these things happen in business and that I should take some time to recover from the shock. But as weeks passed and I remained in my modest home, driving my 10-year-old sedan and adjusting to retirement rather than immediately launching a new venture, her attitude shifted noticeably. "Dad, have you thought about what comes next?" she asked during a phone call approximately 2 months after the final restaurant closed. "You're only 62. You can't just do nothing." "I'm not doing nothing," I replied. "I'm reading books I've been meaning to get to for years. I'm taking walks. I'm reconnecting with friends. I'm thinking." "Thinking doesn't pay bills," she said with an uncomfortable laugh. "Mark and I are concerned about your financial situation." I chose my words carefully. "You don't need to worry about me, Olivia. I planned for contingencies." "What contingencies?" she pressed. "Your entire business just collapsed. Your life's work is gone. What exactly did you plan for?" Rather than reveal the full extent of my financial security, I simply said, "I have savings, Olivia. I'll be fine." Her skepticism was palpable, even through the phone. "Savings can disappear quickly, Dad, especially at your age when healthcare costs start mounting. Mark knows people who could help you figure out your options." I thanked her for her concern and changed the subject, not yet ready to reveal what I had built in the shadows of my more visible business career. Perhaps pride kept me silent, or perhaps it was a desire to see if my daughter would support me based on love rather than financial calculations. Whatever the reason, my reticence would soon lead to the most humiliating evening of my life. 6 weeks later, Olivia invited me to dinner at her home, mentioning that a few friends would be joining us. When I arrived, I discovered that these friends included not only Mark's parents, but also someone Olivia introduced as Walter Simmons, a financial advisor specializing in senior transitions. The elegant dining room was set with Olivia's finest china, crystal glasses catching the light from the elaborate chandelier overhead. As we took our seats, an uncomfortable sense of orchestration settled over me. Every chair had been assigned, with printed place cards and elegant calligraphy, mine positioning me directly across from Mr. Simmons. Conversation during the first course remained superficial. Chicago politics, an upcoming charity gala the Whitfords were attending, mild complaints about seasonal allergies. As the main course was served by the catering staff Olivia had hired for the evening, Mark clinked his glass with his knife, drawing everyone's attention. "We wanted to gather some of our closest family tonight," he began, nodding toward his parents, "because we have some concerns we'd like to address openly and constructively." And that's when it happened. The moment that would eventually force me to reveal what I had kept hidden for decades. Olivia placed her hand on mine in what appeared to be a gesture of support, but felt more like restraint. Dad, since Golden Bridge's bankruptcy, we've been increasingly worried about your future. You're living alone in that aging house, with no income source, depleted savings, and mounting healthcare costs. I started to interrupt, to correct these assumptions, but Olivia continued as if we had rehearsed this scene. We've invited Walter here tonight because he specializes in helping people in your situation, seniors with limited resources who need to make practical decisions about their remaining years. Walter nodded sympathetically, reaching into his briefcase to extract a glossy brochure which he slid across the table toward me. The cover featured smiling elderly people in a garden setting beneath the words, Lakeside Meadows, Affordable Senior Living Solutions. I've reviewed the basics of your situation as Olivia has explained it, Walter said in a practiced tone that managed to be simultaneously authoritative and condescending. And I believe Lakeside Meadows offers an excellent compromise between quality care and financial accessibility. I looked from the brochure to my daughter's face, searching for some recognition of how profoundly she had misunderstood both my financial reality and my capability for self-determination. Finding none, I turned to Walter. And what exactly has my daughter told you about my situation, Mr. Simmons? He glanced briefly at Olivia before responding. That you're recently bankrupted after your restaurant business failed, that you have minimal savings, no substantial assets beyond your home, and that you're reluctant to acknowledge the financial precariousness of your position. Richard Whitford cleared his throat. Raymond, there's no shame in accepting help at this stage. Many people find themselves unprepared for retirement, especially after a business failure. I'm sorry, everyone, but we need to be realistic, Olivia interjected, wineglass poised in her manicured hand. Since Dad's restaurant chain collapsed, he's become a financial liability. We're trying to figure out the most affordable assisted living options. The dining room went painfully quiet. I didn't raise my voice or defend myself. I simply nodded, took a small sip of my water, and asked Mark to pass the bread basket. As I slowly buttered a piece of sourdough, I contemplated how we had arrived at this moment. How had my own daughter come to see me not as the man who had sacrificed everything to give her opportunities, but as a burden requiring management? When had financial status become the primary measure of a person's worth in her eyes? The tension lingered as the dinner continued, conversations stilted and artificial. Walter occasionally offered reassurances about how many people in my situation found happiness in communities like Lakeside Meadows. Victoria Whitford shared an anecdote about her college roommate's father who had transitioned beautifully to assisted living after his retirement funds proved insufficient. Throughout it, I remained largely silent, responding with non-committal phrases when directly addressed. My mind was already turning toward what would need to happen next, not the scripted surrender to reduced circumstances that my daughter had planned, but a long overdue revelation about the life I had built beyond her awareness. As the evening concluded and guests began departing, Olivia pulled me aside in the hallway, her voice low and urgent. Dad, I know tonight was difficult, but we're just trying to help. You need to be practical about your situation. I studied my daughter's face, the determined set of her jaw, the slight furrow between her perfectly shaped eyebrows, the absolute certainty in her eyes that she understood my circumstances better than I did myself. What makes you so certain that you know my situation, Olivia? I asked quietly. She sighed with the exaggerated patience one might show a difficult child. Dad, I've seen the bankruptcy filings. I know what happened to the restaurants. I'm not a financial advisor, but even I can do basic math. Your home is paid off but needs significant updates. Your car is ancient, and you have no visible means of support. What exactly am I missing? Perhaps, I replied, choosing my words with care. There are aspects of my life I've kept private. Olivia's expression shifted from condescension to frustration. This isn't the time for pride or secrets, Dad. This is about making smart decisions before you have no options left. I'll consider what you've said, I told her, accepting my coat from Mark, who had remained silent during our exchange. Thank you for dinner. As I drove home that night, navigating the familiar streets between Olivia's affluent neighborhood and my own modest one, a sense of clarity washed over me. For 20 years, I had maintained the separation between my visible life and my invisible wealth, restaurants and legacy on one side, investments and security on the other. That division had served its purpose during the building phase of my life, but now it had become a liability, allowing my own daughter to fundamentally misunderstand who I was and what I had accomplished. The time had come to bridge these two worlds, to reveal not just the extent of my financial security, but the philosophy behind it. Not out of spite or a desire to embarrass Olivia, but because continuing the illusion would only reinforce the values I saw her embracing, the prioritization of appearance over substance, the equation of worth with wealth, the reduction of people to their utility or burden. Elena would have wanted more for our daughter than this. She would have expected me to correct the course, however uncomfortable the correction might be. As I pulled into my driveway, I made my decision. The revelation would need to be handled carefully, not as a triumphant gotcha moment, but as a thoughtful reimagining of our family narrative. It would require preparation, documentation, and most importantly, a clear articulation of the principles that had guided my financial choices throughout my life. Tomorrow, I would begin this preparation. Tonight, I would sit with the painful reality that my own child had looked at me across a dinner table and seen not a father worthy of respect regardless of circumstance, but a financial liability requiring management. The house was quiet as I entered, the silence a stark contrast to the bustling kitchens where I had spent most of my adult life. I moved through familiar rooms, turning on lights, noticing the small signs of wear that had led Olivia to describe my home as aging. A slight crack in the kitchen tile, faded paint around the window frames, cabinet handles that had lost their shine through years of use. To her eyes, these imperfections represented decline, a failure to maintain appearances. To mine, they were simply evidence of a life lived without pretense, a home valued for comfort and memories rather than impression management. In my home office, I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and removed a leather portfolio, the tangible record of my invisible empire. Inside were statements from investment accounts, property holdings, various financial instruments that had, over decades, grown into a substantial fortune. According to the most recent quarterly statement, my net worth stood at approximately $5.3 million, not including the value of my mortgage-free home. I spread these documents across my desk, a paper trail of patience and foresight. Tomorrow, I would contact Michael Robertson, my longtime financial advisor, to begin the process of documentation and disclosure. But tonight, I simply sat with these records of a lifetime's careful planning, feeling not triumph, but a profound sadness that revealing this wealth had become necessary to restore dignity to our relationship. The journey that had begun with Elena's dying request that I build something for your later years had culminated in this moment, Not the peaceful retirement we had envisioned together, but a defensive position against my own daughter's misconceptions. I wondered what Elena would make of the woman Olivia had become, so different from the compassionate, curious child we had raised together. As I gathered the documents and returned them to their drawer, I made a silent promise to Elena's memory. This revelation would not merely be about financial truth. It would be an attempt to reconnect Olivia with the values we had tried to instill, to help her see beyond balance sheets to the principles that truly mattered. Whether she would be receptive to this deeper message remained to be seen, but I owed it to both Elena and Olivia to try. With that resolution firmly in mind, I turned out the lights and prepared for sleep, ready to begin the careful process of revelation in the morning. The morning after Olivia's disastrous dinner party, I awoke with purpose and clarity. The humiliation of being labeled a financial liability by my own daughter had crystallized something I'd been avoiding for years. The truth could no longer remain hidden. As sunlight filtered through my bedroom blinds, I reached for my phone and made the call that would set everything in motion. "Michael, it's Raymond Chen. I need to meet with you today if possible. It's urgent." My longtime financial advisor responded immediately to the unusual request. "I can see you at 11. Is everything all right, Raymond?" "No," I replied honestly, "but it will be." After a quick breakfast, I spent the next 2 hours organizing decades of financial records. Each statement, each investment decision, each property acquisition told part of a larger story, not just of wealth accumulation, but of values, priorities, and a philosophy about money that ran counter to what my daughter had embraced. Michael's office occupied the 15th floor of a sleek downtown building with views of Lake Michigan. Unlike many financial advisors who surrounded themselves with ostentatious displays of success to impress clients, Michael's space was understated and functional, one of the reasons we had worked well together for 2 decades. "This is unexpected," he said as I spread documents across his conference table. "You're usually content with our quarterly reviews." I explained the situation, Olivia's dinner party, the financial advisor she'd invited, the assisted living brochure, and most painfully, her characterization of me as a burden. Michael's expression darkened. "That's troubling. She has no idea about any of this?" He gestured to the financial statements showing millions in diversified investments. "None," I confirmed. "I've maintained the separation we established years ago. Restaurants visible, investments invisible. But now that division is hurting both of us. I need your help documenting everything clearly, in a format that conveys not just the numbers, but the thinking behind them." For the next 3 hours, we worked systematically, creating a comprehensive portfolio of my financial position. Michael brought in his executive assistant to help organize the materials, and by mid-afternoon, we had produced a presentation that would leave no room for misinterpretation. "This is extremely thorough," Michael observed as we reviewed the final documents. "But Raymond, may I offer a personal observation?" I nodded, curious. "In the 20 years I've worked with you, you've never made financial decisions from a place of ego or vindictiveness. Don't start now. This revelation should educate, not humiliate." His insight struck me forcefully. Was I motivated by a desire to prove Olivia wrong, to watch her face as she realized her mistake? If so, that would make me no better than those who judged others solely by their financial status. "You're right," I acknowledged. "This isn't about winning or losing. It's about restoring truth to our relationship." As I left Michael's office, portfolio in hand, I decided against immediately confronting Olivia. Instead, I would create a context for revelation that allowed for private processing rather than public embarrassment. The last thing I wanted was to replicate the dinner party experience with roles reversed. Back home, I called my daughter. Olivia, I've been thinking about our conversation last night and I'd like to meet with you and Mark this weekend. Just the three of us. Is everything okay? She asked, sounding simultaneously concerned and defensive. If this is about Lakeside, Meadows, we can look at other options. No, it's not about that, I interrupted gently. It's about making sure we all have accurate information before making any decisions about my future. She agreed to Saturday brunch at her home, though I detected reluctance in her voice. With the meeting arranged, I turned my attention to another aspect of my plan. If this revelation was truly about values and not just numbers, I needed to reconnect Olivia with the principles that had guided my life, principles that had once been important to her as well. In the spare bedroom that served as storage, I found boxes containing family photographs, Elna's journals, and memorabilia from the early days of Golden Bridge. For hours, I sifted through these memories, selecting items that might help Olivia remember who we had been before success had changed her perspective, before she had begun measuring worth in dollars rather than character. Thursday morning, I visited Golden Bridge's original location, now a trendy boutique selling overpriced candles and imported soaps. The owner, recognizing me from local news coverage of the restaurant chain's collapse, invited me in with awkward sympathy. It must be difficult seeing it transformed, she said, gesturing to the space that had once held kitchen equipment and dining tables. Actually, I'm grateful it's being used by another small business owner, I replied sincerely. Would you mind if I took a few photographs, for sentimental reasons? She agreed, and I captured images of the architectural details Elena and I had preserved during our renovation 3 decades earlier. The ornate crown molding, the reclaimed wood floor, the arched doorway leading to what had once been our tiny office and was now a display room for aromatherapy products. Friday was dedicated to preparation of a different kind. I drove to Graceland Cemetery, where Elena had been laid to rest 19 years earlier. I hadn't visited in months, a lapse that filled me with guilt as I placed fresh flowers on her. Simple headstone. I'm not sure I've kept our promises as you intended, I said aloud, kneeling beside her grave despite the protest of aging knees. Olivia went to an excellent university, just as we planned. But somewhere along the way, she lost sight of what we valued most. Or perhaps I failed to demonstrate those values clearly enough. A gentle breeze rustled the trees overhead, the bow only response in the quiet cemetery. Tomorrow I'll tell her everything, I continued. Not just about the money, but about why we made the choices we did, about what really matters. I paused, feeling slightly foolish but needing to articulate my fears. I'm worried that it's too late, that she's too invested in appearances and status to remember what you and I believed about success. I remained for nearly an hour, reflecting on the journey Elena and I had begun together and that I had continued, alone. By the time I stood to leave, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This revelation wasn't just about correcting Olivia's misconceptions about my finances. It was about honoring Elena's memory by ensuring our daughter understood the values that had made those finances possible. Saturday morning arrived with unexpected nervousness. I dressed carefully in a crisp button-down shirt and well-maintained slacks, not the designer labels Olivia favored, but clothing that reflected self-respect without ostentation. The leather, portfolio containing my financial documentation sat on the passenger seat of my car, alongside a smaller album of family photographs and mementos. When I arrived at Olivia and Mark's home, I noticed they had arranged the breakfast nook to feel informal. Casual placemats instead of fine china, coffee mugs rather than crystal, presumably to make the discussion of my diminished circumstances more comfortable. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Dad, you're looking well," Olivia greeted me, her eyes quickly assessing my appearance as if searching for signs of decline she could reference later. Mark shook my hand with the forced heartiness I had come to expect from him. "Raymond, great to see you. Coffee?" We exchanged pleasantries while Olivia arranged pastries on a serving plate, the conversation carefully avoiding any mention of financial matters or assisted living options. It wasn't until we were seated with filled plates that Olivia broached the purpose of our meeting. "So, Dad, you wanted to discuss some things about your situation? We're all ears, and please know that whatever you're comfortable with is fine. We just want what's best for you." I took a deliberate sip of coffee, setting the mug down precisely on its coaster, a small action that helped me center my thoughts. "Before we talk about my situation," I began, "I'd like to ask you something, Olivia. What do you think success means?" She blinked, clearly thrown by the unexpected question. "I'm not sure what that has to do with—" "Humor me," I requested mildly. "It's relevant, I promise." She glanced at Mark, who shrugged slightly, equally confused. "Success is achieving your goals, I suppose. Building something significant. Being recognized for your accomplishments." She gestured vaguely around her immaculate kitchen. "Creating security and comfort for yourself and your family." I nodded, acknowledging her answer without judgment. "And how do you measure that success? What are the indicators that tell you someone has achieved it?" Now Mark jumped in, apparently more comfortable with this line of questioning. "That's fairly straightforward, isn't it? Career advancement, financial stability, quality of life metrics, home ownership in desirable areas, ability to access exclusive experiences, that sort of thing. So success is primarily external and financial," I summarized. "Visible achievements and acquisitions." "Not exclusively," Olivia countered, a defensive edge entering her voice. "But those things matter in the real world, Dad. They're objective, measures that anyone can see and understand." "You're right that they're visible," I agreed. "But I wonder if we've confused visibility with importance." I opened the smaller album first, removing a photograph of Elena standing proudly in front of our first restaurant on opening day. Her smile was radiant despite the dark circles under her eyes from weeks of renovation work and planning. "Your mother and I had a different definition of success," I explained, handing the photograph to Olivia. "We believed success meant aligning your daily actions with your deepest values, regardless of whether those actions generated recognition or material reward." Olivia studied the photograph with a softening expression. "I remember this day. I was about 8, right?" 7, I corrected gently. "You helped fold all the napkins and insisted on greeting every single customer." I removed another photograph, this one showing our modest first home with Elena planting vegetables in the small garden while a teenage Olivia reluctantly helped, her expression capturing the universal adolescent embarrassment with parental activities. "We could have afforded a larger house in a more prestigious neighborhood by then," I noted. "The restaurants were doing well, but we chose to stay because the mortgage was manageable, allowing us to allocate resources to other priorities, like Your education fund and the business expansion. Olivia handed the photograph to Mark with a slightly uncomfortable expression. That was practical for that time in your lives. But circumstances change, priorities evolve. They do, I agreed. Which brings me to what I wanted to discuss today. I closed the photo album and placed the leather portfolio on the table, opening it to reveal the comprehensive documentation Michael and I had prepared. After your mother died, I made a promise to ensure your education and opportunities while also securing my own future. To do this, I created a deliberate separation in our finances. The restaurants were visible and public, representing our family legacy and providing for your immediate needs. But simultaneously, I was building something else, something private and secure. I slid the first document across the table, a summary statement of my investment portfolio showing its current valuation of just over $5, $3 million. Olivia stared at the page, her coffee forgotten in her hand. Mark leaned forward, financial professional that he was, immediately grasping the significance of the numbers before him. This can't be right, Olivia said finally, looking up with confusion. These are your accounts? They are, I confirmed, proceeding to share the complete documentation, real estate holdings through my LLC, technology investments made in the early 2000s, the diverse portfolio of stocks, bonds, and alternative investments that Michael had helped me build over 2 decades. But the bankruptcy, the restaurants. Olivia struggled to reconcile this new information with her assumptions. Golden Bridge Restaurants Inc. declared bankruptcy, I explained calmly. That entity failed, yes, but I had intentionally structured my personal finances to be independent from the business. The restaurants were meant to be our visible legacy, something you could point to and say, my parents built that. The investments were my invisible security, separate and protected. Mark was reviewing the documents with increasing respect, his professional understanding allowing him to quickly grasp the sophistication of the strategy. This is extremely well managed, he admitted. Your diversification and risk management are exceptional for someone without a financial background. I had excellent guidance, I acknowledged. And I approached investing with the same patience I applied to perfecting recipes. Small adjustments, careful observation, consistent principles applied over time. Olivia finally set down her coffee, her expression fluctuating between shock, relief, and something that looked uncomfortably like embarrassment. Why didn't you tell me? All this time I've been worried about you, trying to figure out how to help you, and you've been wealthy? The question contained layers of assumptions that needed addressing. I leaned forward, keeping my voice gentle but firm. First, Olivia, I'm financially secure, not wealthy. There's a difference that's important to me. Second, I didn't tell you because these resources were meant for my later years, not for display or discussion. And third, I paused, weighing my words carefully. Until recently, I never thought it would matter to how you viewed or treated me. The implication hung in the air between us. Olivia flushed, recognition dawning in her eyes. The dinner party, she said quietly. Walter Simmons, Lakeside Meadows. I nodded, not needing to elaborate. Mark cleared his throat awkwardly. Raymond, you have to understand, we were operating with incomplete information. From what we could see, the bankruptcy, your continued modest lifestyle, the logical conclusion was financial distress. Was it? I challenged mildly. Or was the logical conclusion that the same person who successfully built a business from nothing, put his daughter through Northwestern, and navigated multiple economic downturns might have planned for contingencies? The question wasn't meant to be cruel, but it exposed a painful truth. They had assumed the worst about my capability and foresight, because it fit their narrative about aging and business failure. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry. Dad, I was just trying to help before things got worse. I didn't want you suffering alone out of pride." "I understand your intentions," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "But I need you to understand something important. My worth as a person, my dignity, my value to this family, my right to make my own decisions. None of that should depend on my bank balance." Her eyes dropped, acknowledgement in her silence. "Whether I had $5 or $5 million, I continued, I would still be your father. I would still deserve the basic respect of being consulted about my own life rather than having decisions made about me as if I were incapable." "You're right," she whispered, tears now falling freely. I handled this all wrong." Mark was still reviewing the documentation, professional interest apparently overriding the emotional tension of the moment. "Raymond, these returns are impressive even by institutional standards. Who's been managing this for you? I'd like to compare notes with them on a few of these allocations." His question, focused entirely on the financial aspects rather than the human dynamics at play, perfectly illustrated the disconnection I was trying to address. Before I could respond, Olivia shot him a look of disbelief. "Mark, that's what you're taking from this? Investment strategies? My father just revealed he's been hiding millions of dollars while we've been planning his transition to assisted living." "Not hiding," I corrected gently. "Separating. There's a difference. Hiding implies deception. Separating reflects a philosophical choice about the role of money in life, that some resources are for building legacy, others for securing foundation, and they serve different purposes." I removed the final document from my portfolio, a letter Elena had written to Olivia before her death, which I had preserved but never shared, waiting for the right moment. Now, with Olivia struggling to process this revelation about our finances, it seemed that moment had arrived. "Before we discuss the specifics of my financial situation further," I said, "I'd like you to read something your mother wrote for you. I think it might help contextualize the choices I've made since she left us." I handed the sealed envelope to Olivia, who accepted it with trembling hands. "She wrote to me? Why didn't you give me this before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear what she had to say," I answered honestly. "And perhaps I wasn't ready for you to hear it either." As Olivia broke the seal and began reading her mother's final words, I turned to Mark. "To answer your question, Michael Robertson at Principal Partners has been my advisor since before Elena passed. He's excellent, though his approach might differ from what you're used to. He focuses on aligning investments with values rather than maximizing returns at any cost." Mark nodded, processing this information with what appeared to be genuine, professional respect. "I've heard of him. Conservative reputation but consistent results. Old school." "Sometimes old school principles endure because they work," I observed. "Not everything needs disruption or innovation." Our conversation paused as Olivia finished reading Elena's letter, her tears flowing freely now. She carefully refolded the pages and returned them to the envelope, taking a moment to compose herself before speaking. "Mom knew," she said finally. "She knew I might lose my way, that I might start valuing the wrong things. I nodded, remembering Elena's uncanny ability to see potential futures, both bright and troubling. Your mother understood human nature, how success can change perspective, if not anchored to deeper values. It's why she insisted I build security independently from legacy. She wanted you to inherit our values, not just our assets. I feel like I've failed her, Olivia admitted, her voice small. Failed both of you. No, I said firmly. You haven't. Failed. You've succeeded by the metrics you chose to measure: career, home, status. But perhaps those metrics were incomplete. Mark, sensing the deeply personal turn in the conversation, tactfully excused himself to make fresh coffee, leaving Olivia and me alone for a moment. I don't understand how you're not angrier, she said once he had left. After how I spoke about you, how I treated you at that dinner. Would anger improve anything? I asked simply. Would it help you understand the lessons I'm trying to convey? No, she acknowledged, but it would be justified. Perhaps, I agreed, but justified doesn't mean beneficial. I didn't come here to punish you for a mistake, Olivia. I came to correct a misunderstanding that was harming our relationship, and to invite you to reconsider what truly matters. In the brief silence that followed, I could almost feel the presence of Elena, her wisdom, her compassion, her unwavering belief in focusing on what could be built rather than what had been. Broken. So what happens now? Olivia asked eventually. Where do we go from here? It was the question I had been waiting for, the opening to move from revelation to reconstruction. That, I said with a small smile, is entirely up to us to decide. Together as a family with complete information and mutual respect. Mark returned with the coffee pot, refilling our mugs as Olivia wiped away the last of her tears. The atmosphere had shifted, the tension of secrets replaced by the more constructive tension of reconciliation and new understanding. As we began discussing practical next steps, I felt a weight lifting that I hadn't fully acknowledged until its absence. The division between my visible and invisible lives had served an important purpose during wealth building, but maintaining it had come at an increasing cost to authenticity and connection. Whatever challenges lay ahead in rebuilding my relationship with Olivia, we would face them in the light of complete truth about our finances, yes, but more importantly, about the values that gave those finances meaning. The revelation of my financial security transformed the dynamics of our Saturday brunch in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. As the initial shock subsided, Olivia's expression cycled through a complex series of emotions: embarrassment giving way to relief, confusion to curiosity, and finally settling into something resembling genuine introspection. The careful script she had prepared for managing her financially distressed father had been rendered obsolete, forcing an authenticity our relationship had lacked for years. I still can't believe you managed all this while running the restaurants, she said, gesturing to the financial documents spread across the table. Most restaurant owners barely stay afloat, let alone build a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio. That's precisely why I did it, I explained. The restaurant industry is notoriously volatile. Your mother and I knew we needed stability independent of Golden Bridge's success. Mark, who had been unusually quiet since my revelation, finally spoke up. The diversification strategy is impressive. Real estate holdings, technology investments, municipal bonds. It's textbook risk management executed with remarkable discipline. I nodded my acknowledgement of his professional assessment, but my focus remained on Olivia, who seemed to be processing more than just the financial implications of what I'd shared. In Mom's letter, she began hesitantly, she wrote that she was worried I might become preoccupied with appearances, that I might forget what you both valued most. She paused, fingers tracing the edge of her mother's handwriting on the envelope. She knew me better than I knew myself. She knew human nature, I corrected gently. Success can be a powerful distraction if not grounded in deeper principles. Olivia's gaze met mine directly for the first time since I'd revealed my financial situation. How did you resist it? The temptation to show your success, to live more. Extravagantly? It was a sincere question, one that deserved a thoughtful answer. I took a moment to organize my thoughts, wanting to articulate something I had felt intuitively but rarely verbalized. I never saw money as an achievement in itself, I finally replied. To me, financial resources were tools, important ones, certainly, but valuable only in relation to what they allowed us to build, protect, or experience. But surely some luxuries would have been justified, Mark interjected. After decades of hard work, most people would want to enjoy some rewards. Who says I haven't enjoyed rewards? I countered with a smile. I've had the freedom to work with purpose rather than desperation. I've watched my daughter graduate from an excellent university without debt. I've been able to help employees during personal crises without compromising the business. These are luxuries of a different kind, but no less satisfying. Olivia was studying me with new eyes, as if seeing aspects of my character that had been previously invisible to her. I always thought you lived modestly because you had to, not because you chose to. That's the difference between necessity and philosophy, I observed. When moderation comes from financial limitation, it feels like deprivation. When it comes from conscious choice, it feels like freedom. As our conversation continued, a subtle shift occurred. From the shock of revelation to more meaningful exploration of the principles that had guided my financial journey. Olivia began asking questions about specific decisions. Why had I invested in renewable energy companies? Before they became mainstream? What had prompted me to purchase rental properties in neighborhoods that were overlooked at the time but thriving now? How had I maintained the discipline to reinvest profits rather than increase personal spending as the restaurant succeeded? Each question offered an opportunity to illuminate not just what I had done, but why, the values underlying the visible actions. Mark, to his credit, engaged with increasing sincerity, his professional interest in investment strategies gradually expanding to include the philosophical framework behind them. By early afternoon, as our discussion showed no signs of concluding, Olivia suggested moving to their back patio, where the October sunshine provided pleasant warmth. As we settled into comfortable outdoor furniture, she disappeared briefly into the house, returning with a bottle of wine and glasses. I think this calls for something special, she said, presenting a bottle I immediately recognized, a limited-release California Cabernet from a small vineyard Elena and I had visited on our 15th anniversary. We've been saving this for an important occasion. The gesture touched me deeply. This particular wine held significance beyond its quality or price. It represented a memory Olivia had preserved despite her apparent shift toward valuing only the quantifiable aspects of success. As she poured 3 glasses, I felt a tentative hope that perhaps the distance between us wasn't as vast as I had feared. Perhaps beneath the trappings of status and appearance, the daughter Elena and I had raised still existed, still carried the values we had tried to instill. I'd like to propose a toast, I said, raising my glass, to honest conversations and new understandings. And to Mom, Olivia added softly, who somehow knew exactly what letter I would need to read nearly 20 years after she wrote it. We touched glasses in the autumn sunlight, the wine carrying echoes of a shared past now being re-examined through more mature eyes. After a contemplative sip, Mark set his glass down with unexpected decisiveness. Raymond, I owe you an apology, a sincere one. I've been dismissive of your business experience and financial acumen based on superficial assessments. That was both unprofessional and personally disrespectful. His directness surprised me. Throughout our relationship, Mark had maintained a polished veneer of civility that rarely revealed genuine emotion or vulnerability. This acknowledgement represented a significant departure from his typical demeanor. I appreciate that, Mark, I replied. Though I should clarify that my intention today wasn't to prove anyone wrong or demand apologies. It was simply to establish truth as the foundation for our future relationship. That's exactly it, Olivia interjected, leaning forward intently. The future. Dad, what are your actual plans? Not what we assumed, but what you genuinely want for your next chapter? Her question revealed how completely she had pivoted from seeing me as someone to manage to someone whose autonomous choices deserved consideration. A shift that meant more to me than any financial recognition. I've been contemplating that very question since the bankruptcy, I admitted. The end of Golden Bridge closed one significant chapter of my life, but endings often create space for new beginnings. I described the ideas that had been forming during my months of supposed retirement, not another restaurant chain, but a culinary education foundation focused on immigrant entrepreneurs. The concept would combine my restaurant experience, my investment knowledge, and my passion for helping others build sustainable businesses. The restaurant industry has one of the highest failure rates of any sector, I explained, warming to the subject as I articulated plans that had previously existed only in private reflection. But many of those failures aren't due to concept or culinary skill. They're due to inadequate financial literacy, operational systems, or succession planning. You're talking about addressing the very issues that ultimately affected Golden Bridge, Olivia observed perceptively. Exactly, I confirmed. The embezzlement succeeded partly because I had expanded beyond what I could personally oversee without implementing adequate financial controls. That painful lesson shouldn't be wasted. It should serve others. Mark's expression had shifted from polite interest to engaged curiosity. Have you considered structuring this as a formal nonprofit? There could be significant advantages both for impact measurement and donor relationships. For the next hour, our conversation transformed into a collaborative brainstorming session. Mark offered insights about organizational structures and potential funding sources, while Olivia applied her marketing expertise to questions of positioning and community outreach. Throughout this exchange, I observed a quality that had been absent in our previous interactions: genuine respect for each other's distinct capabilities. As the afternoon light began to soften, Olivia suddenly paused mid-sentence, a realization dawning in her expression. This is the first time we've ever really talked like this, as equals, each bringing different perspectives to a shared goal. The observation hung in the air between us, its implications extending beyond this single conversation to the broader patterns of our family relationship. You're right, I acknowledged. And I bear responsibility for that limitation. By concealing significant aspects of my life and work, I inadvertently prevented this kind of authentic exchange. But I never asked, Olivia countered. assuming her share of accountability with newfound maturity. I made assumptions based on what was visible and accessible, never considering there might be more depth to explore. Mark glanced between us, then contributed his own insight. I think we all participate in simplified narratives about family members. It's easier than engaging with full complexity. The conversation paused as we each contemplated this truth. The afternoon had revealed not just my hidden financial security, but the ways we had all contributed to maintaining incomplete versions of each other. Versions that allowed for comfortable interaction without requiring genuine understanding. As evening approached, bringing a slight chill to the air, Olivia suggested we continue our discussion over dinner. What followed was the most authentic family meal we had shared in years, not the performance of hospitality that had characterized the disastrous dinner party, but genuine connection characterized by equal participation and mutual curiosity. Throughout the evening, I observed subtle shifts in both Olivia and Mark. She referenced her mother more frequently than had been her habit, as if Elena's letter had reopened a connection long suppressed. He demonstrated increasing interest in aspects of my experience beyond financial outcomes, asking thoughtful questions about the challenges of building a business as an immigrant entrepreneur in a previous era. When I finally prepared to leave, around 9 o'clock, Olivia walked me to my car, creating space for a moment of private conversation. "Dad?" she began, hesitation evident in her voice. "I've been thinking about the Lakeside Meadows situation and the dinner party." She took a deep breath before continuing. "I need you to know that I'm deeply ashamed of how I approached that. Not just because I was wrong about your finances, but because I was wrong about how to treat you, regardless of your financial situation." The streetlight illuminated genuine contrition in her expression, and I was struck by how much she resembled Elena in that moment. The same forthright acknowledgement of mistakes, the same determination to address rather than justify them. "We all make errors in judgment, Olivia," I replied gently. "What matters is how we respond once we recognize them." "I want to do better," she said with quiet intensity. "Not just in how I treat you, but in what I value and prioritize generally. Reading Mom's letter made me realize how far I've drifted from what you both taught me." I embraced her then, this daughter who had both wounded and surprised me in a single day. "The beautiful thing about principles is that they're always available to return to," I told her. "They wait patiently for rediscovery." As I drove home, through the quiet suburban streets, I reflected on the day's unexpected evolution. What had begun as a necessary but potentially divisive revelation had transformed into a foundation for renewed connection. The process would not be instantaneous or without complications. Genuine change rarely is. But the first crucial steps had been taken toward a more authentic relationship. The following week brought tangible evidence of this shift. Olivia called midweek to invite me to Sunday dinner, mentioning that she and Mark had been discussing my foundation concept and had some ideas to share. The invitation itself was unremarkable, but her approach represented a meaningful departure from previous patterns. She suggested a time rather than dictating one, asked about my dietary preferences rather than assuming knowledge, and described the gathering as casual rather than orchestrating an impression. When Sunday arrived, I immediately noticed differences in both atmosphere and interaction. Their home, while still beautiful, appeared slightly less staged. Magazines were actually open on the coffee table, a light jacket draped over a chair, evidence that the space was lived in rather than merely displayed. Olivia greeted me wearing casual slacks and a simple sweater, rather than the carefully curated designer ensembles that had become her uniform for family gatherings. Most significantly, their questions and comments throughout the evening revealed genuine curiosity about my life and experiences rather than polite obligation. When the conversation turned to my foundation concept, both presented ideas that demonstrated thoughtful consideration rather than superficial engagement. "I've been researching similar initiatives," Mark explained, pulling up a presentation on his tablet. "There are 3 existing programs with comparable missions, but they're all focused on established restaurants seeking expansion rather than new entrepreneurs. That creates a distinct niche for your approach." Olivia had clearly applied her marketing expertise to the concept, presenting draft messaging that captured the essence of what I hope to achieve. "The key differentiator is your immigrant perspective combined with proven financial acumen," she observed. "Most culinary education programs focus exclusively on food preparation or basic business concepts, not the integration of cultural authenticity with sustainable financial practices." As they shared their research and recommendations, I experienced a profound gratitude that transcended the specific content of their suggestions. They had engaged with my vision as something worthy of serious consideration, not as the retirement hobby of a financially compromised father, but as a meaningful contribution with potential for significant impact. Throughout the evening, our conversation expanded beyond the foundation to include reflections on broader questions: the nature of meaningful work, the balance between financial security and purpose-driven action, the legacy we each hoped to create. These philosophical explorations represented a level of discourse that had been notably absent from our previous gatherings, where discussion typically centered on surface-level updates or local social dynamics. As the evening concluded, Olivia mentioned that she had been rereading her mother's journals, documents I had preserved but rarely reviewed due to the emotional weight they carried. "I found an entry from when I was about 10, she said, where Mom wrote about a conversation the 2 of you had regarding what you hoped I would learn from watching you build Golden Bridge. She specifically noted that you wanted me to understand that business success should serve life values, not define them." Olivia paused, her expression thoughtful. "I think I missed that lesson somewhere along the way." "We all have moments of forgetting what matters most," I replied. "The important thing is that we can always choose to remember." Over the following weeks, our family relationship continued its gradual transformation. The revelation of my financial security had catalyzed the process, but the more meaningful changes occurred in areas unrelated to monetary considerations: the quality of our communication, the authenticity of our interactions, the alignment of our expressed values with our actual choices. Olivia began visiting me at my home more frequently, sometimes bringing specific questions about her mother or our early years building Golden Bridge, other times simply sharing coffee and conversation, without agenda. During one such visit in early November, she noticed a photograph on my bookshelf that captured her attention. Elena and me standing proudly before our second restaurant location, arms around each other, exhausted but exhilarated by the expansion. "You both look so happy," she observed, studying the image. "Not just accomplished, but genuinely joyful." "We were," I confirmed. "Not because the business was succeeding, although that was certainly satisfying, but because we were building something meaningful together, something aligned with our deepest values." "What were those values?" she asked, her expression revealing that this was not a casual inquiry but a sincere attempt to understand the foundations of our family narrative. I considered the question carefully, wanting to articulate principles that had often been demonstrated but rarely named explicitly. Dignity in work, regardless of its status in others' eyes. Generosity that expands rather than diminishes the giver. Patience with processes that cannot be rushed. Integrity that remains consistent whether observed or not. I paused, remembering conversations with Elena late at night after the restaurants had closed. And perhaps most importantly, the understanding that meaningful connection with others transcends any material measure of success. Olivia listened with unusual attentiveness, as if mapping these articulated values against her own life choices. "I've achieved a lot by conventional standards," she said finally. "Career advancement, financial comfort, social position. But lately, I've been asking myself whether these achievements have brought the fulfillment I expected." It was a profound question, one that revealed significant introspection beyond the immediate circumstances of our family revelation. Rather than offering my perspective, I simply asked, "And what have you discovered?" "That external validation is exhausting," she admitted. "It requires constant maintenance and never feels secure. The metrics keep changing, or new comparisons emerge, or what once seemed sufficient suddenly doesn't anymore." I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in her observation. "Your mother used to say that pursuing status is like trying to fill a cup with a hole in the bottom. No amount is ever enough because the container itself is flawed." Olivia smiled at this quintessentially Elena metaphor. She had a way of making complex ideas simple, didn't she? I miss that clarity. Her perspective remains available to us, I reminded her. In her journals, in the values she helped establish, in the questions she would ask if she were here. This conversation marked a significant milestone in our evolving relationship, a shift from the practical implications of my financial revelation to the deeper recalibration of values and priorities it had sparked. While the initial disclosure had corrected a specific misconception about my circumstances, its greater impact lay in creating space for authentic reconnection with principles that had been overshadowed by superficial measures of success. The approach of Thanksgiving brought this transformation into sharper focus. The previous year's holiday had epitomized the disconnection in our family, an elaborate production in Olivia and Mark's dining room, with conversation restricted to safe, shallow topics and interactions characterized by performance rather than presence. This year, Olivia surprised me by suggesting we break with recent tradition. "What would you think about a completely different Thanksgiving?" she proposed during a phone call in mid-November. "Something simpler, but more meaningful." When I asked what she had in mind, her suggestion revealed how significantly her perspective had shifted. Rather than hosting at their home with its emphasis on impression management, she proposed that we prepare a meal together at Golden Bridge's original location, now vacant again after the candle shop had relocated to a larger space. "I've already spoken with the property manager," she explained. "He's willing to let us use the space for the day. We could bring portable equipment, cook together, and eat where it all began. Just the three of us, focused on gratitude rather than appearance." The proposal touched me deeply, representing a deliberate choice to prioritize meaning over display. "I think that sounds perfect," I told her, emotion making my voice slightly unsteady. "Your mother would have loved the symbolism of returning to our beginnings." Thanksgiving Day dawned clear and cold, the kind of crystalline November morning that had greeted us on Golden Bridge's opening day 3 decades earlier. When I arrived at the vacant storefront carrying containers of prepared ingredients, Olivia and Mark were already there, having set up folding tables, portable burners, and simple place settings. The space echoed with memories, Elena instructing, Our first employees in proper dumpling folding techniques, regular customers who became friends over years of consistent patronage, Olivia completing homework at the corner table after school. Now emptied of commercial fixtures, the location's original architectural features were more visible. The exposed brick wall we had carefully restored, the hardwood floors we had refinished by hand, the large windows that had attracted us to the space initially. As we prepared the meal together, Olivia asked questions about the early days, how we had developed recipes, navigated cultural differences with local suppliers, balanced quality with affordability. Mark, whose family background had always emphasized patronage of fine dining rather than the practicalities of food service, showed genuine interest in the operational details of building a restaurant from nothing. The margins must have been incredibly tight at the beginning, he observed as I described our initial pricing strategy. How did you manage cash flow through seasonal fluctuations? The question would have seemed calculated to highlight financial vulnerability a few months earlier. Now, it represented authentic curiosity about the practical challenges of entrepreneurship. When we finally sat down to our meal, served on the simple plates we had brought rather than fine china, the contrast with previous Thanksgiving gatherings was striking. Gone were the performance anxiety, the careful positioning, the subtle status signaling that had characterized family holidays in recent years. In their place was something both simpler and more profound, genuine presence with one another, authentic, appreciation for the journey that had brought us to this moment. As we shared the meal in the space where Golden Bridge had begun, I felt Elena's absence acutely, but also her continued influence in the values being rekindled. The circle had not broken but merely expanded, incorporating new understanding while returning to essential principles. After we had eaten, Olivia raised her water glass in a toast to beginnings and endings, failures and successes, and the wisdom to know which is which. We touched glasses in the late afternoon light streaming through the windows. Father, daughter, and son-in-law, united not by obligation or appearance, but by growing mutual respect and reconnection with foundational values. As we cleaned up, preparing to leave the space to its emptiness once more, Olivia paused in the doorway to the small back room that had once served as our office and her after-school homework station. "I've been thinking about Mom's letter," she said quietly, particularly the part where she wrote that true wealth isn't what you accumulate but what you put into circulation, not just money, but knowledge, compassion, opportunity. I nodded, remembering Elena's insistence that prosperity without purpose was merely hoarding. "I want to put more that matters into circulation," Olivia continued with unexpected vulnerability. "I'm just not entirely sure how to begin." Her admission contained both acknowledgement of past misalignment and openness to future redirection, a powerful combination that suggested genuine transformation rather than temporary adjustment. "Beginning is often simpler than we make it," I offered. "It starts with a single choice to value substance over appearance, a single interaction where authenticity takes precedence over impression." As we locked the door of the empty restaurant that had once represented our family's beginning, I realized that our Thanksgiving celebration had marked another kind of beginning, one built not on financial revelation or correction of misunderstanding, but on the more enduring foundation of shared values rediscovered and recommitted to. The journey ahead would certainly include challenges and adjustments as we navigated this evolving relationship. Change, even positive change, rarely proceeds in a straight line. But we had established a crucial foundation for that journey. One, based on mutual respect, authentic communication, and alignment with principles that transcend financial consideration. In that moment, standing on the sidewalk where our family story had begun 3 decades earlier, I felt profound gratitude, not just for the financial security I had built, but for the opportunity to reconnect with what had always mattered most: the legacy of values that Elena and I had hoped would outlast any material success. As winter settled over Chicago, the transformation in my relationship with Olivia continued to deepen beyond the initial revelation. What had begun as a necessary correction of financial misunderstanding had evolved into something far more meaningful: a fundamental realignment of values and priorities that influenced actions large and small. The holiday season, historically a time when status consciousness had been most evident in Olivia and Mark's choices, now offered a canvas for demonstrating these shifting perspectives. 2 weeks before Christmas, Olivia called with an unexpected request. "Dad, I've been thinking about holiday gifts this year," she began. "Mark and I usually exchange expensive items that neither of us truly needs. But after our conversations about value versus price, I'm questioning that tradition." "What are you considering instead?" I asked, curious about the direction of her thinking. "That's actually why I'm calling," she replied. "I remember you once mentioned that meaningful gifts require knowledge of the recipient, genuine understanding, rather than just purchasing power. I'd like to give Mark something that reflects that philosophy, but I'm not sure where to begin." Her question represented a significant departure from previous holiday approaches, which had typically involved designer brands and visible luxury. More importantly, it revealed her active engagement with the principles we had been discussing, rather than merely theoretical agreement. Over the next hour, we explored what she knew about Mark's deeper interests beyond his professional identity: childhood fascinations, unrealized ambitions, meaningful experiences that had shaped him. The conversation was revealing not just for the gift ideas it generated, but for what it demonstrated about Olivia's evolving perspective, her growing awareness that status symbols make poor substitutes for personal connection. Several days later, Mark called me separately with a remarkably similar inquiry about Olivia. "Raymond, I need your advice," he said, his typically confident tone replaced by genuine uncertainty. "I've been rethinking our usual Christmas exchange. The standard jewelry or designer items suddenly seem inadequate." These parallel conversations highlighted how the shift in values was affecting not just my relationship with Olivia, but the dynamics of her marriage as well. Both partners were independently questioning patterns that had previously gone unexamined, recognizing the limitation of material exchanges devoid of deeper meaning. As Christmas approached, I received a third unexpected call, this one from Richard Whitford, Mark's father, whose condescension at our first meeting had set the tone for our subsequent interactions. "Raymond," he began without preamble, "Mark tells me you're developing some sort of culinary education foundation for immigrant entrepreneurs." His tone contained the familiar note of skepticism that had characterized our previous exchanges, and I prepared myself for another subtle dismissal of my post-bankruptcy endeavors. "That's correct," I confirmed, keeping my response neutral. "It's in the early planning stages." "Well, I'd like to hear more about it," he continued, surprising me with what seemed like genuine interest. "Perhaps over lunch? I have some experience with nonprofit governance that might be relevant." The invitation was unexpected enough that I momentarily wondered if Olivia or Mark had prompted it. But the conversation that followed during our lunch meeting suggested that Richard's interest, while perhaps initially catalyzed by learning of my financial security, had developed into something more authentic. "I've spent 40 years in corporate, law, he explained as we shared a meal at a downtown restaurant he had selected, notably more modest than his previous choices. Built a successful practice, made partner, accumulated all the expected trappings of success. He paused, studying his water glass with unusual contemplation. But lately I've been questioning what that success has actually produced beyond financial security. That's a profound question, I observed. One that becomes more pressing as we gain perspective. Indeed, he agreed. Mark's been sharing some of your perspectives on purpose versus status, meaningful work versus mere achievement. I initially dismissed them as philosophical luxuries, but I've been finding myself returning to these ideas. What followed was the most genuine conversation Richard and I had ever shared, a discussion of legacy, contribution, and the distinction between what we own and what we build. By the meal's conclusion, he had offered not just governance expertise for my foundation, but connections to potential donors and a commitment to personal involvement. I've spent decades helping wealthy individuals minimize tax burdens, he noted as we prepared to leave. Perhaps it's time I helped direct some of those resources toward creating opportunity rather than merely preserving wealth. This unexpected alliance represented yet another ripple effect of the original revelation. Evidence that authentic values, once articulated and demonstrated, could influence perspectives previously seemed immovable. As Christmas Eve arrived, Olivia invited me to join them for a small gathering at their home. In previous years, their holiday celebrations had been elaborate affairs designed to impress. Catered food, professional decorations, perfectly coordinated table settings that prioritized appearance over comfort. This year's gathering represented a striking departure from that pattern. The first difference was immediately apparent upon my arrival. Rather than the formal table setting in the dining room, Olivia had arranged comfortable seating in their family room. A fire crackled in the previously unused fireplace, and the elaborate artificial tree of prior years had been replaced by a smaller but fragrant live pine. We decided to focus on comfort this year, Olivia explained, taking my coat. And authenticity. The meal reflected this shift. Dishes prepared by Olivia herself rather than catered, served family style on platters that encouraged sharing and conversation rather than formal presentation. Some items were clearly experimental, evidence of genuine effort rather than polished performance. I tried to recreate Mom's dumplings, Olivia admitted as she placed a slightly misshapen but aromatic platter on the table. They're not as beautiful as hers were, but the process of making them connected me to memories I had forgotten. The gift exchange that followed dinner further demonstrated the evolution in their values. Instead of the designer watch or luxury accessories that had characterized previous exchanges, Mark presented Olivia with a carefully restored edition of her favorite childhood book, one she had often mentioned her mother reading to her, but which had been lost in a move during college. "How did you find this?" she asked, genuine emotion in her voice as she carefully turned the pages. "I've looked for this edition for years." "Your father helped," Mark admitted. "He remembered the specific illustrations you loved most. It took some searching through specialized bookshops, but seeing your reaction makes the effort worthwhile." Olivia's gift to Mark revealed similar thoughtfulness, a series of flying lessons with a vintage aircraft restoration group, connecting to a passion for aviation he had expressed in college but set aside for his financial career. "This is incredible," he said, studying the hand-designed certificate she had created. "How did you know this was still something I thought about?" "I asked better questions," she replied simply, her gaze briefly meeting mine with shared understanding. My own gifts to them reflected this new emphasis on meaning over market value. For Olivia, Elena's handwritten recipe journal that I had preserved but never shared, and for Mark, a first edition investment guide published in 1937 that articulated principles of value-based investing largely forgotten in contemporary finance. The evening concluded with conversation rather than the polite but prompt departures that had characterized previous gatherings. As we talked late into the night, I observed a quality in both Olivia and Mark that had been notably absent in recent years. A present-moment engagement unconcerned with impression management or status positioning. When I finally prepared to leave around midnight, Olivia walked me to the door, creating space for a private moment of connection. "Thank you," she said simply, embracing me with genuine warmth. "For what specifically?" I asked, curious about which aspect of our evolving relationship she was referencing. "For not giving up on me," she replied, her voice containing a vulnerability I hadn't heard since her adolescence. "For believing the daughter you and Mom raised was still in here somewhere, underneath all the trappings and status anxiety." "She always was," I assured her. "Values don't disappear. They just sometimes get temporarily overshadowed." The year's end brought with it natural reflection on the journey our family had traveled. From the humiliation of that dinner party where I had been labeled a financial burden, to the authentic reconnection that had gradually emerged from that painful moment. While the revelation of my financial security had catalyzed the transformation, the most meaningful changes had occurred in areas money couldn't touch: the quality of our communication, the alignment of actions with values, the capacity for genuine presence with one another. As the calendar turned to January, this evolution continued to manifest in concrete ways. Olivia approached me with an unexpected proposal related to my foundation concept. "I've been thinking about your culinary education initiative," she began, during a weekend visit to my home. "The marketing strategy we discussed was solid, but I wonder if there's a more direct way I could contribute." When I asked what she had in mind, her response reflected significant personal reflection. "I've been reassessing my consulting work lately, questioning whether it genuinely utilizes my capabilities or simply maintains our lifestyle. What if I reduced those clients and dedicated specific hours each week to developing the foundation's communication strategy and community partnerships?" Her proposal represented more than professional assistance. It signified a reevaluation of how she allocated her time and energy, a willingness to prioritize meaning over maximum income. This shift in perspective extended beyond our specific project to influence other aspects of their lives as well. In February, Mark surprised both Olivia and me by announcing he was exploring a transition within his investment firm, moving from high-net-worth client services to their emerging impact investment division, which focused on generating both financial returns and measurable social benefits. "The compensation structure is different," he acknowledged during a family dinner where he shared this development. "Potentially lower bonuses in the short term, but the work aligns more authentically with what I value, not just what pays most." Olivia's supportive response to this announcement, prioritizing his professional fulfillment over income maximization, highlighted how thoroughly their shared perspective had evolved. A year earlier, such a decision would have sparked concern about status implications and lifestyle adjustments. Now, it generated genuine conversation about purpose and alignment. These shifts extended to practical lifestyle choices as well. In March, Olivia mentioned they were reconsidering their housing situation. "The North Shore house was always more about impression than actual living," she admitted during one of our now regular Sunday brunches. It's beautiful, but requires constant maintenance and feels designed for entertaining rather than daily life. What are you considering instead? I asked, curious about the direction of their thinking. Something smaller, but more intentional, she explained. A place selected for quality of life rather than zip code prestige, ideally with a kitchen designed for actual cooking rather than just appearance, and perhaps a dedicated space where I could work on foundation projects. This reconsideration of their most significant status symbol represented perhaps the clearest evidence of their evolving priorities, a willingness to question not just minor consumption habits, but fundamental lifestyle choices that had previously seemed immutable. Throughout this period of transformation, I continued developing the culinary education foundation concept, now with active involvement from both Olivia and Mark. What had begun as my individual vision gradually evolved into a family initiative that incorporated our complementary strengths, my restaurant experience and immigrant perspective, Olivia's marketing expertise, Mark's financial knowledge. By April, we had established a formal nonprofit entity, secured initial funding commitments, including a significant contribution from Richard Whitford that represented his own evolving perspective, and developed a curriculum that integrated culinary skills with financial literacy and business sustainability principles. The Foundation's mission statement, collaboratively crafted during a weekend planning retreat, reflected the values that had been rekindled through our family journey. To empower immigrant entrepreneurs with the culinary, financial, and operational skills necessary to build sustainable businesses that honor cultural heritage while creating economic opportunity. As we prepared for the Foundation's first pilot program, scheduled for summer, I received an unexpected invitation from Olivia and Mark to join them for dinner at a new restaurant in downtown Chicago. The location they selected was neither the type of trendy establishment they had previously favored for status signaling, nor one of the remaining upscale Chinese restaurants that might have evoked memories of Golden Bridge. Instead, it was a modest but well-reviewed immigrant-owned establishment featuring fusion cuisine that reflected the chef's journey from Vietnam to America. The significance of this choice wasn't lost on me. It represented thoughtful consideration rather than default status positioning. More importantly, it demonstrated their growing awareness of how even small decisions reflect deeper values. During dinner, after discussing foundation developments and their ongoing house hunting process, Olivia shared a revelation that crystallized how profoundly her perspective had shifted. "I had lunch with Victoria last week," she began, referring to Mark's mother, whose polished exterior had always concealed a sharp focus on social positioning. She was complaining about a friend who's downsizing from their Lake Forest mansion to a mere 3-bedroom condominium now that their children are grown. Olivia paused, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. A year ago, I would have joined her in questioning this downgrade. But sitting there listening to her dissect this woman's choice, I suddenly realized how empty that entire framework is, judging life decisions by how they appear to others, rather than how they serve authentic needs and values. "What did you say to her?" Mark asked, clearly curious about this interaction with his status-conscious mother. I suggested that perhaps her friend had found liberation in prioritizing experiences over maintenance, connection over impression, Olivia replied. Victoria looked at me as if I'd suggested selling all our possessions and joining a commune. We all laughed at this image, but the underlying significance remained. Olivia had not only changed her perspective, but found the confidence to articulate those changed values, even in contexts where they would not be readily embraced. As our meal concluded, Mark stepped away briefly to take a work call, creating a moment for private conversation between Olivia and me. I've been thinking about Mom a lot lately, she said, her expression thoughtful as she traced the rim of her water glass, particularly about whether she would recognize the person I became after her death. So focused on external validation, so concerned with appearances. We all drift sometimes from our foundational values, I observed. The important thing is finding our way back. That's what I've been realizing, she nodded. The foundation wasn't lost, just temporarily obscured. The basic architecture remained intact, waiting to be rediscovered. The metaphor was particularly apt coming from someone who had spent years focused on visible facades rather than structural integrity. It reflected not just intellectual understanding but embodied wisdom, the kind that influences action rather than merely informing opinion. As May arrived, bringing with it the first anniversary of Golden Bridge's final closure, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past year. From the public humiliation of business failure to the private triumph of values reclaimed and relationships restored. The bankruptcy that had once seemed like an ending had ultimately catalyzed a new beginning, not just for me professionally through the foundation, but for our family relationships and individual perspectives. The revelation of my financial security had corrected a specific misconception, but the more profound revelation had been the values that informed those financial choices. Values that had been temporarily overshadowed, but never truly abandoned. 1 year after watching the remaining assets of Golden Bridge sold at auction, I stood in a very different auction, this one at a culinary institute where we had secured space for the foundation's educational programs. Olivia, Mark, and I were bidding on kitchen equipment for our teaching facility, making strategic decisions about where to invest in premium items and where standard equipment would suffice. This reminds me of when you and Mom opened the first Golden Bridge, Olivia observed as we evaluated commercial mixers. The careful balancing of quality and cost, investment and value. With one significant difference, I noted. This time, I'm not doing it alone. The comment was simple but captured the essence of what had changed. My financial journey had begun as a solitary endeavor, building security independently while maintaining a careful separation between visible legacy and invisible foundation. Now, that separation had been replaced by integration, of financial reality with authentic relationship, of individual journey with shared purpose. Later that evening, as we celebrated securing all the necessary equipment for our pilot program, Mark raised his glass in a toast that captured this integration. To financial wisdom that creates freedom rather than dependency, he began. To success measured by impact rather than appearance, and to family relationships based on truth rather than assumptions. As we touched glasses, I felt the presence of Elena, not as a painful absence but as a continuing influence. The values we had established together had endured, even through periods of drift and misalignment. The principles we had hoped to instill in our daughter had ultimately proven resilient, awaiting rediscovery rather than requiring reinvention. In June, as we prepared for the Foundation's inaugural class of immigrant entrepreneurs, Olivia and Mark finalized the purchase of their new home, a thoughtfully designed space in a diverse neighborhood with excellent public transportation and thriving independent businesses. The house was smaller than their North Shore mansion, but more intentionally aligned with their evolved priorities, featuring a professional-grade kitchen for actual cooking rather than display, comfortable gathering spaces that prioritized conversation, over-impression, and dedicated work areas for their increasingly purpose-driven professional endeavors. The decision to leave their prestigious address had initially raised eyebrows among their social circle, with questions about downgrading or financial necessity. Rather than becoming defensive or creating elaborate justifications, they responded with simple authenticity about aligning their living environment with their values, prioritizing purpose over status, function over appearance, community over exclusivity. Their moving day coincided with the Foundation's final preparation week before welcoming our first cohort of students. As I helped them arrange furniture in their new home, a task they had previously outsourced to professional designers focused more on visual impact than practical living, I observed how their relationship with physical space had transformed, alongside their broader perspective. Whereas their previous home had been organized around formal entertaining and status display, this space reflected more authentic priorities, comfortable areas for meaningful conversation, functional work, spaces for purposeful activity, and thoughtful integration of items selected for personal significance rather than designer labels. As we arranged family photographs in their new living room, Olivia paused while unpacking a particular frame. The image of Elena and me at Golden Bridge's original location that had captured her attention months earlier. "I was thinking we might place this prominently," she suggested, indicating a central position on their main bookshelf, as a reminder of where we come from and what actually matters. The simple gesture encapsulated how thoroughly perspectives had shifted, from hiding family history that didn't align with status narratives to celebrating the authentic journey that had shaped our values. That evening, as we shared a simple meal in their partially settled kitchen, the conversation turned to the Foundation's upcoming launch and the journey that had brought us to this moment. "It's remarkable to think about what catalyzed all of this," Mark observed, refilling water. Glasses from a pitcher Elena had hand-painted decades earlier. Another family item now displayed with pride rather than hidden away. "If we hadn't made those assumptions about your finances, if we hadn't organized that disastrous dinner party, if I hadn't been called a financial burden," I added with a smile that contained no bitterness, only appreciation for how misunderstanding had ultimately led to greater truth. "I still cringe remembering that," Olivia admitted, "not just because I was wrong about your financial situation, but because I was measuring your worth by entirely the wrong metrics." "We all use the wrong metrics sometimes," I observed. "The question is whether we're willing to recalibrate when evidence suggests our measurements are flawed." As our conversation continued into the evening, I reflected on the journey from that painful dinner to this moment of authentic connection. The revelation of my financial security had been necessary but insufficient. A factual correction that created space for the more meaningful realignment of values and priorities that had followed. The $5 million in investments that had shocked Olivia and Mark upon its revelation had served its practical purpose in securing my retirement. But its greater value had ultimately been as a catalyst for conversations about what truly constitutes wealth. Not just accumulated resources, but purposeful deployment. Not just financial security, but meaningful contribution. Not just what we own, but what we build and share. As we concluded our meal and prepared to part ways, they to continue unpacking, I to finalize preparations for the Foundation's launch, Olivia walked me to the door of their new home. Unlike their previous residence, where formality often characterized even family departures, this space invited authenticity even in small moments. "I've been thinking about something Mom used to say," she remarked as I prepared to leave. "That true wealth isn't what you have, but what you value." I didn't really understand that for a long time. "Understanding often requires lived experience," I replied. "Some wisdom can't be inherited. It must be discovered through our own journey." Still, she said thoughtfully, I'm grateful for the foundations you both established, the principles that remained available for rediscovery even when temporarily obscured. As I drove home that evening through the summer twilight, I reflected on the multifaceted journey of the past year, from the public narrative of business failure to the private reality of financial security, from painful misunderstanding to authentic reconnection, from values overshadowed to principles reclaimed. The painful moment when my daughter had called me a burden after my business failed had initiated a necessary revelation about my hidden investments. But the greater revelation had been about investments of a different kind. The principles Elena and I had established, the values we had demonstrated, the foundations we had built that transcended financial consideration. These less tangible but more enduring investments had ultimately proven their worth, not in market value but in human terms, not in accumulated interest, but in reclaimed authenticity, not in financial security, but in relational integrity. As Golden Bridge Restaurants had closed its doors, a different kind of bridge had ultimately opened, connecting past principles with present choices, financial wisdom with human values, individual journey with shared purpose. This bridge, unlike its namesake, could not be quantified on balance sheets or bankruptcy filings. But its construction represented the most meaningful form of wealth I had built, not the $5 million in strategic investments that had secured my retirement, but the principles those investments reflected and the relationships those principles ultimately restored. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.